Well, hi there. It's Wayne Bryan in my video library coming to you for another Wayne Wednesday. My goodness, the topic we put out for this one certainly seems to have launched the imagination of quite a few of our viewers. So we will do our best, but we've decided this topic might just be rich enough that we need to carry it over for the next couple of weeks. So we'll see what happens. But we are going to talk about musicals that were unsuccessful. Of course, a theater like ours that does 5 shows every summer in a big 2,000 seat theater, we're likely to do the shows that have been successful elsewhere, that are going to bring in a big audience and that you're going to know well before you come see it, or at least you will have heard about it in a positive way. Shows that flop, however, are greatly in the majority. Many, many more Broadway shows do not make their money back than the ones that actually do make their money back. And that's the official definition of a flop. But as we'll see as we discuss this for the next few weeks, there are flops and there are flops. There are some shows that are so terrible you wonder how they ever got there. Someone's ego, someone with a big bankroll, or something that looked like a good idea on paper, but all the wrong people were hired to put it together. Or most of the right people, but one wrong person. So many things can go wrong. It can be something that happens in the news that makes your topic now suddenly wrong for that moment in history. All of these things have happened. But before we go any further, I want to recommend 2 books to all of you. If you like this topic, you probably have, but if you don't have, track down a copy of Ken Mandelbaum's Not Since Carrie. Carrie, in this case, being the mega flop musical based on the Stephen King book and the Sissy Spacek movie that followed. It's a wonderful book that outlines pretty much every show that lost money in the mid 20th century on up through 1990. And now, picking up the slack is a brand new book. I wasn't able to get a hard copy of it, but I'm reading it on Kindle. Stephen Purdy's Flop Musicals of the 21st Century. And he just chooses 10 musicals to talk about, but he goes into depth with them and talks about people who worked on them. And these include titles like Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, Lestat, The Pirate Queen, Rocky, King Kong, Escape to Margaritaville, Glory Days, Bullets Over Broadway, Urban Cowboy, and Dance of the Vampires. When we get into more modern history, we actually have friends and alumni who were in a lot of those shows. So it will be fun to read this book and see what he brings up. First of all, I want one slight anecdote. Stephen Sondheim had as his mentor the great Oscar Hammerstein II. And when Stephen Sondheim told Mr. Hammerstein that he wanted to write musicals, Hammerstein gave him a project. He asked him to write a musical based on a short story, write a musical based on a play or film, and write a musical based on his own imagination. And Sondheim found out what Hammerstein knew from his own experience, that if you start with something compact like a short story or a novella or a shorter film, it's much easier to expand it into a musical than it is to take something massive and try to whittle it down to 2.5 hours running time and still find times for songs. And in terms of original ideas for musicals, it's very, very seldom that those are successful. So you take your chances. Rodgers and Hammerstein had great successes with Oklahoma, Carousel, The King and I, South Pacific, and The Sound of Music, all of which were based on books or films or plays. But they did not have success with Allegro and Me and Juliet, which were original ideas. It's much, much harder. So let's look at some of the things that people asked about this week. And then I want to take it a couple different directions. We'll see how much time we have today. We try to keep these to about 10 or 15 minutes. So anything we don't get to today, we'll follow up in the weeks ahead. How did the same people who did Les Mis and Miss Saigon go so wrong with The Pirate Queen? Well, here's one of those cases where Les Mis, although it's a sprawling, huge novel, it's been adapted many, many times for the stage and for the movies and for television. So there's a pretty good format for putting the story into some kind of narrative that makes sense to an audience. Also, the fact that it has been adapted that many times shows that there is an audience for that particular story. And Mr. Purdy, in his new book, his basic premise is the show can be good or less good, but if there is not an audience that finds the subject matter interesting, you're probably going to be in trouble. Uh, Les Mis and Miss Saigon, of course, is based on Madame Butterfly and has the same basic structure as that. Pirate Queen was based on an historic incident and a novel about a woman warrior. It had a lot of foreign last names. The feeling was that it was a story that modern audiences would have trouble relating to, and then it was compounded with the way the story got told. It underwent a lot of changes in previews. The leading lady was our Stephanie Block, who was our Fanny Bryce and Funny Girl here, and who recently won a Tony Award as playing Cher in the Cher Show. Stephanie went through so much in the tryouts for that show that she lost her voice right before opening, and the understudy was reviewed by the critics for one of the performances, and then they came to another one to see Stephanie. It was just a traumatic show from start to finish, and the audience that would be interested in that subject matter never showed up. Somebody asked about Jane Eyre. Linda Ebright asked about Jane Eyre, which premiered here at the Center for the Arts when Kathy Page Houtman had the program out there. John Caird came and Paul Gordon, the composer, and it had so much promise. It went to the La Jolla Playhouse, and our friend Megan Drew won a Drama Log Award, a Hollywood Star Award for her performance in that. Then when it went to Broadway, they made some changes, but it seemed to land on Broadway at a time when dark, all-sung, no-laugh musicals were just not what the audience was looking for. Paul Gordon has adapted a lot of classic literature. He has a new musical based on Emma by Jane Austen. He has a new Pride and Prejudice. And his musicals don't tend to turn out any hit songs that people know, but people enjoy the music. And if you're fans of those books, perhaps there is some interest. Certainly there are fans of those books everywhere, but those books tend to adapt extremely well to TV series and films with big, expansive British vistas, and to put them into compact-sized musicals, which his musicals tend to be small-sized, they lose some of the scope, and the songs have not yet been found to adequately replace the original dialogue, which they have to take the place of. Several of the stage one shows seem to have promise. Where are they? I think you'd have to ask, Kathy and the stage one folks for real updates. They had a great success with a show called Jungle Man, but then the people who had the copyrights to the Tarzan stories got very upset with them, and they had to make a lot of changes on that. I was in a show there called Paper Moon, based on the book and film of the same name, and we thought it was really charming. But the composer and librettist of Paper Moon, the musical, only had the rights to that material for a certain number of years, during which time they had to get a Broadway production of it, or the rights reverted back to the, I assume, Paramount Studios. And that's what happened. So that musical can't be done anywhere now because the rights to it no longer exist. Karen Gale asked, did you ever see It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, which is a really fun score by the people who wrote Bye Bye Birdie. It came out at a time before we had all the Marvel and DC universe, so it would be interesting to take a look at it now. They recently did it down in Texas with a revised book. They did a very good production of it in the Encores series, and our friend Ed Watts, who has done many shows here, played Superman. I would recommend, there is a video documentary, here's the lights, called Look Up in the Sky. And my brother produced and wrote this, so of course I'm very partial. But they show a segment of a TV version of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman in that. And you can get a glimpse of it, although that wasn't a particularly successful rendition of the show. Bonnie and Clyde, really great songs and wonderful performances on Broadway, but it didn't really make a case for why we should root for these people who go into Depression-era stores and shoot people. Innocent people die, and our two leading actors are only given the excuse that she wanted to be a movie star and he wanted to be a cowboy. not quite enough to root for them in the same way that, for instance, you root for Sweeney Todd, who does terrible things, but we see all of the indignities that he's suffered leading up to that. So I think they didn't quite make the case for them. Ordinary Days by Adam Guan is a really interesting four-person musical that got a small Broadway production, and there's an excellent cast album. And it's a show that's, I think, very good for universities and for small regional theaters. I don't want to give away what the show is about because it's a surprise toward the end, but it's a show I really thought was wonderful. Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. This starred Josh Groban when it opened on Broadway, and I thought it was sensational. I saw it twice. I loved it. I would have gone more. We hope to do the show here in a future season at MT Wichita. It is an adaptation of just 70 pages of the massive novel War and Peace. Has great music, and it's really colorful and fun. They opened it with a star who was terrific in it. When he left, they thought that the show could be carried without a star name, but because it had been promoted that way, for some reason, the audience has stopped coming. And then the young man who had taken Josh Groban's place sort of got the blame for it, and they wanted to quit his contract early and bring in Mandy Patinkin, but it led to a big stink that was really inappropriate and unfortunate for this show. It was producers who had not worked on Broadway before, not really understanding the pitfalls of what went on. Good Time Charlie. This was in the 70s. I had friends in it. I saw it a lot. It was the Joan of Arc story turned around as a vehicle for Joel Grey as the Dauphin of France. But Joan of Arc is always going to be the most interesting character in that story, and making it a vehicle for him turned out to be fraught with peril. He was originally attracted to the show because it was not going to be a tap dance musical. He was not going to be in modern dress. It was going to be different from anything he had done. And then they got out of town with the show and started performing it, and Joel Grey wasn't getting the kind of ovations that he is used to getting for the shows where he does do what he does. So sure enough, by the time it came to New York, in the middle of Act Two, he put on some tap shoes and got on a table and did a tap dance. And that was just not quite right for that era in France. It was a show that had convictions when it started, but it kind of lost them on the way, which is something that happens pretty often. Before we finish up today, I'm going a little longer than usual, but I thought it'd be interesting to point out flop shows that have worked well at MT Wichita. That is to say, they were not able to find their audience in New York, but for whatever reason, and we only do a show from Wednesday to Sunday, so we only have to fill the auditorium 7 times. And if we see something that we think is worthy or has a great score or has good potential for our acting company, we try it. Some of them, of course, were very successful movies that did not work well in their Broadway transfers, but have worked great for us. Shows like Gigi, Meet Me in St. Louis, State Fair, 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. We've done 3 times since I came here, successful every time. And Singing in the Rain, likely, we've done, likewise, we've done 3 times. Those are popular titles that the Broadway productions just didn't somehow master. But we're good at those classic titles, and our audience knows what to expect. More recently, stage plays that were based on films that did not find their audience in New York, but we had a really great time with. Catch Me If You Can, based on the Tom Hanks movie. Big Fish, which we talked about on a Flashback Friday a couple weeks ago. And 9 to 5, Dolly Parton's expansion of the non-musical film. We had a lot of fun with this, and I think our audiences did too. Then our nice relationship with the Disney company has allowed us to have nice success with shows that either did not play as long as they wanted on Broadway or have not yet played Broadway, including The Little Mermaid, which we've done twice and really enjoyed completely. Freaky Friday, we loved working on. And if you're in the Spotlight Society and watching Grease tonight, look for some comments after the movie about Freaky Friday. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, we loved this production. It did not come to Broadway after its initial run on the East Coast, and we think it's one of the best things we've ever done. And of course, High School Musical 1 and 2. Not Broadway material, but boy, did we have a good time working on both of them. So I think I should stop for now. I have so much more to talk to you about on this. Please write your questions, and also any opinions I express are my opinions. I do not mean if you love one of these shows, then I kind of suggested why it wasn't successful. Please keep loving it. It's important that we have the songs and the shows that we feel connected to and we love, and you don't have to explain that to anybody. Your opinion is valid. I'm just sharing some of mine since you asked. So, Spotlight Society tonight. Tune in for Grease, and I'll see you there. And then on Flashback Friday, we've got a great show for you.